Little Hands, Big Attitude, Book 5, The Thief and the Sleeper, Chapter 3, Ground Rules. By the time Rouge finally decided to guide him through this maze of broken-down attractions and out of this place, it was well into the afternoon. Was Shadow surprised? No, not really. In the meantime, Shadow was stuck sitting around, trying to get his thoughts in order. He had been in a compound, locked away. Why? Was he dangerous? He didn't feel dangerous. What did Rouge's bosses want with him? Why was she so eager to please them that she'd kidnap someone? Then again, he wasn't sure if it was kidnapping so much as stealing, considering he was practically in storage before that time. What kind of person locked another person in storage? He needed context, a lot of context, and if Rouge had any of it, she wasn't exactly in a sharing mood. Nor was she in the mood for him to share what he'd seen and heard in the House of Mirrors. A girl treating him kindly, another golden hedgehog calling out for him, a voice calling him out to go to some place called Green Hills. Finally, as the sun was beginning to sink towards the horizon, Rouge decided it was time to go and find some free samples, she said.
Free samples. Sounds like more thievery to me.
Shadow mumbled under his breath as he limped after her.
If it's thievery, then why do they make it so easy by putting it outside where everyone has access to it?
Table scraps?
Dumpsters? Doofus.
Shadow paused, his brows furrowing.
Could you stop calling me names? I have one, and I'd prefer you use it.
Yeah, well, I'd prefer we keep moving and try not to make so much noise you'll give us away to the humans.
Is that such a bad thing? Maybe they'd actually tell me what's going on here.
Oh yeah? Why don't you try talking to one? See what happens.
Shadow stood up a little straighter.
Maybe I will.
He took in a deep breath, though he wasn't really going to call out for anyone else. Still, it was enough to make the bat whip around and rush over, covering his mouth.
No. I was being sarcastic.
She hissed desperately, and Shadow released the breath in a hard huff.
Dude, seriously, nobody can know we're here.
Shadow pulled her hand loose from his muzzle.
Why not? What's going on? Why are we hiding like this?
Look. The place I took you from was a government base, and if they find us, they will lock both of us up in capsules, not to mention that most humans don't even know we exist.
Why?
Because we're not common to this world. There's just us, and a lot of average Joes are walking around with pistols strapped to their hips and ready to fire at anything that freaks them out, and trust me, we'd freak them out.
Why did the government have me locked up in the first place?
Maybe they thought you were dangerous? I don't know, but it doesn't matter. We just need to get back to the hideout, and then the guild will keep both of us out of trouble.
You've got me all confused here. First, you tell me that the guild intends to sell me and you get some of the profits. And now, you're acting like they'd protect me from other humans. Make up your...
Shadow was cut off as Rouge's foot moved onto his bad one, and sharp pain shot up through his leg. He tried to yelp, but it was also cut off by Rouge's hand slapping over his mouth, leaning more on his foot as she did so, and causing more pain. Golden sparks burst up from his quills as he whined, shooting upwards and causing a nearby street light to burst in a shower of sparks and shattered glass.
What are you doing? You're gonna.
Shadow ripped her hand away.
Off my foot!
Oh.
Rouge stepped back, and Shadow crumpled to the ground as the pressure was gone and the pain began to ease, though it still throbbed sharply.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Shadow wiped pain tears from his eyes, swallowing hard as his head tried to spin.
It was an accident, I know. But this isn't going to make our progress much better.
Rouge sighed, wrapping her arms around herself and avoiding eye contact with him.
Right. Must be more than just a cramp, huh?
Shadow nodded, and then got up from the ground.
Come on.
If we need to avoid humans, then we need to not be here when they come to look at that busted light.
You read my mind.
She led the way, and Shadow hopped on one foot along the way, not trying to put his injured foot down much as they wandered into the darker shadows of the trees and bushes surrounding the abandoned amusement park. He should have been more careful. He should have checked every possible alarm and made sure they were disabled. He would have been more careful. He would have made that heist without so much as a mouse knowing he was there. Finding the compound's location had been easy enough with some eavesdropping, and infiltrating the compound security team had been simple, seeing as Commander Walters had been all too eager to hire as many men as he could to make sure nobody entered the compound and tried to set Project Shadow free. He was so desperate to get those extra guards that with a little name switching and a forged resume that was barely looked at, Stone had slipped into the ranks without so much as an odd look. Project Shadow. That had been his target. The creation of Professor Gerald Robotnik, the grandfather of his beloved doctor. Following his disappearance, Stone had sworn revenge on that blue hedgehog and his new allies, and he would use this powerful weapon to enact it. If only some other pathetic life form hadn't gotten to it first. Seconds. It had been mere seconds. The doors to the most secure portion of the facility had opened, only to reveal an empty capsule, and a bent-up air vent hatch suggesting their manner of escape. Agent Stone had disabled the cameras for his own extraction, so he had no visual footage to go off of, but they had gotten audio. An investigation of the air ducts had been made to find that portions of one section were warped, like the metal had been pulled in and twisted like taffy. It was so smooth, it was almost like the metal had been formed that way when it was still hot, not ripped apart at the rivets like it should have been. Stone had gotten a copy of the audio playout from the room before he made his great escape, and now he sat in a tiny camper in an RV park, the lights out but his face lit up by the screen of a laptop computer, headphones covering his ears as he listened carefully to the audio. This RV had been his home during the time he wasn't actively watching the hedgehog from his place at the Mean Bean, and much like the coffee house's outward appearance, it seemed normal and common to anyone that walked by, but hidden in its walls was technology a gamer could only dream of. Agent Stone slowly turned a dial, increasing some sounds and quieting others. He had been able to determine two voices speaking, a male and female. Now, he needed to figure out what they were saying. It was hard to get all of the dialogue under the hisses of machinery and the blaring alarms in the background, but it was definitely a male and female having conversation, perhaps over how to get Project Shadow back out of the compound. They also sounded young, perhaps even teenagers. Yes, the male's voice was definitely cracking a bit from what he could tell. He'd evaluated the sizes of the ducts, how small they were. No human could fit their way through there, not a human of average size, anyway. Perhaps a dwarf, but something told the man that this wasn't the case. However, he was aware of a humanoid form that might be able to fit without any problems. The aliens of Sonic's world, and that only enraged him about this even more. It had been bad enough that the Red Echidna warrior had abandoned the doctor's side and teamed up with the hedgehog, but if more of them were continuing to arrive and continued to go to Sonic's view of things. When Dr. Robotnik returned, which he would, he might have to face down an entire army of children with powers they couldn't account for. But then there was that. Children. So far, not a single adult from their world had arrived. They were all young, inexperienced, innocent for the most part. He wasn't quite sure how innocent the Echidna was. They weren't grown up and trained for battle, trained by the best. A smile formed on Agent Stone's lips for a moment. He could do this. If he managed to hide out in plain sight of the hedgehog for months, then he could certainly expose these adolescent aliens' weaknesses and exploit them to his advantage. Now, if only he could get a fix on. A ping from another monitor caught his attention, and he looked up to see a flashing beacon on the screen. Energy pulse detected. Agent Stone set the laptop aside and wandered over to the other console to examine the readings. He was smarter than the doctor gave him credit for, not as brilliant as the doctor, but that was not the point. Even with the limited exposure he'd had to the Master Emerald's power and frequency, he had been able to define it enough to form a scanner for its pulses. It was primitive, but further study of the energy would solve that problem. It had picked up a high amount of the energy coming from Green Hills a short time ago, a few months in between, but considering what he'd seen Sonic do in the past, he did not want to investigate it without considerably intense preparation beforehand. But this pulse, it had come from somewhere else entirely, from just outside a small town in South Dakota, and about 100 miles from Agent Stone's own location. Far enough away that the likelihood of Sonic finding it was limited, but close enough that the thieves might get to Green Hills shortly if he wasn't quick. Or worse, the government would get to them and then he'd be back to square one. He gave a nod.
Do not worry, Doctor. When you return, I will have your empire ready to follow your command.